Happy Tuesday, Jesse.
Happy Tuesday. Opportunity to chat with some more cool and awesome people.
As always.
It's nice when you're not just talking about yourself too. Like you're talking about the guests that we get to share with everyone today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Goodness.
How does everything going for you today?
Oh, well. And on the latest segment of Where in the World is Live, I am in Mexico City and everything is fantastic. It's quite warm. And after this, I'm going to go grab a croissant from my favorite bakery, probably go and enjoy a park. So it's quite lovely. But to be fair, I wasn't supposed to be in Costa Rica for 2 months, and turns out I do not get along with bugs really well, or lizards. And I had to get out of there very quickly. So
Yeah, I bet.
things are
I
things
feel,
are much better now.
I feel like we had a bunch of people drop off when you said it's warm and sunny in Mexico because in Canada we're dealing with a polar vortex, at least in Eastern Canada. So I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm not sure if I want to listen to your warm like 30 degrees and croissants and things.
Oh my
Just
God,
joking
that's
with
so
you.
fair. It's fair. Gosh. How are you though? What have you
But
been up to?
good. I mean, it's interesting as I was working out this morning, thinking about our session today, and this one's a timely topic for me. And the reason being is my partner and wife, she was away for 8 days in Puerto Rico as well. So there's a few messages about things like, "Oh, I'm tired of taking Uber," and I was like, "Really? We're kind of dealing with operational demand of three kids and hockey, dance, and birthday parties at the same time." But I was thinking about with that, I was thinking about charge and like managing it and even before our chat here, we were talking about how there can be a situation, and you can have how you're looking at that situation can influence even of is this something that adds to your battery, or is this something that might drain your battery? And then also I've been finding over the week, for me, I'm pretty ritual on like ensuring I get a ton of exercise every day, ensuring that like I try to sleep at the same time, eat certain things, keep the house in a certain condition. Like it's something that I find adds charge to me typically. But I found myself with like a new context in that I was like solo parenting. I almost had to readjust some expectations, both of the environment that I was operating within as well as myself, in order to think like what's best for this moment. And so maybe, where I would typically engage in like a really, really hard, longer exercise, maybe I keep it a bit shorter, knowing that there's going to be a different demand on me in the evening. So I found myself perhaps subconsciously initially, but really being mindful and managing my charge, and so that I can do the things I need to do professionally as like a father, and then also for my own self and well-being and sanity, because it's possible with all that three kids firing at you that can be challenged for sure. So yeah, it's interesting as I was thinking about that and thinking about how that would influence our conversation today.
Would you say it's one of those things where it's like when you're on an airplane and it's like put your mask on before you help others?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, I think a lot of it is like, how can I be aware of myself? And, um, I think we can often be really attuned, which is a part of us being social beings. But I think sometimes it can be unproductive in relation to like being so worried about other people's emotions or other people's thoughts. And we really don't have a lot of control over it. And so in those moments where, one of my daughters is asking for toast, the other one wants milk, and the other one wants eggs, and you're on the other side feeling like you're running all over the kitchen trying to manage all that. I also think then, in that moment, like, how do I take a breath for myself and then recognize too that my response to the stimulus that's coming at me really dictates the further stimulus that's coming. And so it's tough. I'm not saying it's an easy thing, but it's something that I think if we can ground ourselves and take care of ourselves, we might be in a better position to support and ultimately move closer towards the things that we want to achieve, personally, professionally, whatever.
Well, I'm very excited for today's conversation then. Maybe we can bring in the guests
Yeah, sure, let's
and
do
get
it.
that in. So we have two guests today. We have Jason Drenth, who has over 30 years of utility experience in the electric industry and more recently the water and wastewater industry. He's a general manager of both electric and water, wastewater utilities at the city of Lethbridge. Hi, Jason. Um, Hi, and then we also have Dr. Dana Lee Bagley, who is a registered psychologist with 2 decades of professional experience in clinical psychology, health psychology, and organizational psychology. A ton of applied experience and research knowledge on burnout and psychological safety in the workplace, and just so much more. So this is kind of the perfect um, pairing that we've got today. I think I'm really excited for this. But before we actually dive into the questions, because we're talking about charge, Dr. Lee Bagley and Jason, what have you done today, or maybe are you going to do this week to up your own charge? Is there something some kind of ritual or something that just you go to all the time to make sure that you've got a full battery?
Yeah, well, for me, actually, I'm a routine person. So I have a set routine that I pretty much do every day. It may change as far as timing goes. For instance, we have a beautiful river system here in the city of Lethbridge, and at least once a day. Doesn't matter what time it is, at some point during the day, I'll get out and just go, depending on how the day's going, I'll get out for a 10-minute walk. It could be a half-hour walk, whatever fits. But that's what I'll be doing at some point during the day, guaranteed.
Routine is also something that I need. I think that's great. And a nice walk is perfect. And then, yeah, Dana.
Yeah, I also really think having a routine is really important. It takes less energy if you have a routine because you're thinking less about what you're going to do to charge. And it also gives you an early warning system if you're getting off track, right? Because instead of being like, how do I feel? Because we can trick ourselves into feeling fine until we're totally not fine. If you're off your routine, that's your early warning system, right? So mine for sure involves going to the gym and having like a hard workout. And so that's part of my routine. If I skip that, like, if I skip 2 per week, I usually go 7 days a week. If I skip 2 or more per week, I'm like, I need to be mindful. Once I do that 2 weeks in a row or 3 weeks in a row, I'm already in trouble in terms of like well-being.
Well, it's funny as when we were introducing Liv, our guest here, I was thinking first, what why are why are we like an energy expert and thinking like, no, it's not that type of charge. We're talking about like our own personal charge. But as you said, I think it's such great guests. We've got someone that I would argue is one of the people in our country with some of the most expertise in mental health, how to talk about charge, live your values, that type of stuff. And we got a person that I've had the opportunity to work with who actively does it every day. And I think it's a really neat opportunity for, okay, here's what literature and best practice are telling us, but also what is like, how do we make that make sense in terms of some layman terms? Anyways, I'm really looking forward to that. But maybe before we get too far down, and maybe I'll start with you, Dana, and then we'll go to Jason. I'm just curious, like, what is charge when you think about it? Like, what does it mean to you?
So we talk about it a bit in terms of like the neurobiology of how humans are hardwired. And so we talk about having a survival brain, which is your emotional brain. It's responsible for automatic thoughts, learning, memory. And then you have your prefrontal cortex, which is your frontal lobe. And that's the part where willpower, self-control, and it functions like a battery. So your survival brain is always working. It's unconscious, automatic. You don't have to do anything, nor can you control anything coming out of that deliberately. You can influence it, but you don't have direct control. Your frontal lobe is like a battery, and so we will wear out our battery of self-control. And so that's what I think about as charge, is basically how much charge do you have to be able to do the things intentionally that you want to. It will, will use up that battery. It's just a normal human thing, but thinking about charging it and how it's, the things that are draining it, the things that are charging it. And then also just to keep in mind that our best decision making is not from your frontal lobe. It's not being logical. It's actually what we refer to as wise mind, which is the overlap of your logical mind and your emotional mind, right? So you need your frontal lobe battery to be charged so you can do things intentionally that you want to do. Our survival brain makes us do really short-term fixes that worked when we were cave people and our life expectancy was 30 and the kinds of threats we deal with were bear attacks, but sometimes doesn't work in our modern world. So you need that frontal lobe to do things intentionally that are value driven, that are important to you. And so that's what I think about as charge.
I actually have
I
a
love it.
question.
Oh, go
Sorry.
ahead. Go ahead, Liv.
Is this the same part of the brain that doesn't develop fully until like you're like 25?
Yeah.
Is that the same thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
How does that impact maybe younger employees or interns or things like that? Do they get burnt out more easily? Do they find it harder to charge?
Yeah, so we talk about typically, and there's also kind of statistics suggesting that in women it develops around age 24 and men around age 29. And having a 15-year-old son, I totally can understand that. And so what it means is that you don't have full control over yourself, right? So we don't have full control. Nobody does. We don't have unlimited control. And when people have conditions like depression, anxiety, chronic pain, that influences that balance between your survival brain and your frontal lobe. Some of your battery has to go to dealing with these chronic diseases, for example. So you have less frontal lobe battery to play with. Disorders like ADHD are directly related to how well your frontal lobe functions, and executive functioning, which is things like decision making, planning, controlling your behavior. So, what it means is that for younger people, they don't have as much self control, right? They don't have the same ability to control their behavior as when it's fully formed. And we should, just in part keep that in mind that they, do not have their brains fully formed to be able to do all the things that we might be asking them to do.
It makes me feel some self-compassion around like why there was more ice cream eaten tonight or over the last week than maybe in the previous like 4 months. And it's probably because there wasn't that charge of filter that I had enough capacity to like make a better choice. I know we've talked a lot
Yep.
about that.
That's, why binge eating is more likely to happen in the evenings compared to the mornings, right? Because you use it up. We use it up to like get dressed. You use it up to drive to work and not scream at people. You use it to like, wait in a line. All these things that require us to control our behavior. And yeah, over time, if your battery is being drained by other things like new demands that you don't normally have to account for in your battery, right? That's when we end up making short-term decisions. Your survival brain totally wanted you to have ice cream and was very happy that you had ice cream for dinner. It also tells me to have ice cream for dinner when I'm really tired, right? If I have enough battery, I can sometimes choose a healthier option. If I've run out of battery, survival brain wins, right? And it's a pretty normal human thing. Yeah.
That's a good point.
I always just say like, congratulations, you're a well-functioning human. Millions of years of evolution are working properly and got you to eat the ice cream.
Yeah, I love that. And it's something that I've really always taken from our conversations is that like acknowledgement of like, oh, your caveman brain is working the way it's supposed to. And I find that in itself can release some of the either shame or embarrassment or disappointment I have. Just one more question, because I think it would be an interesting, I love the cross section of wise mind that you spoke to. And then Jason, I'm going to ask you about leadership. I'm curious, Dana, like what would be an example of where that wise mind is working at its best? So in a practical sense, because I love the depiction of like where it's a nice intersection between emotional and your executive brain.
I think the easiest way for us to understand it is like in interpersonal relationships, right? We often kind of expect people to be logical and we're kind of frustrated or confused when they don't just do what we tell them to do. Like, and humans are not like that, right? We have both this emotional brain and, a logical brain. And so to connect with people, you need both, right? You can't connect with people purely on logic. That's not like where our emotions live. It's not like it's like when we talk about it hit me here, but not here. To get here, you need your emotional mind to be involved, right? And so to have real connections with people, to really understand each other, and to have good interpersonal relationships, you need that wise mind where you're using some logic, right? And some self-control, but you're also using that emotional brain to connect.
That's awesome. Thanks. So Jason, like with everything Dana was chatting about here, I'm curious is, with you being a very senior leader inside of your group, why is it important for you to understand perhaps not the science, the depth that Dana is, but even like being aware of how it's like how it's showing up, I guess, like as a leader inside of your group?
Well, being self-aware really to where your charge is pretty important because it really reflects on how you show up in the office or the workplace. I've just taken on a new department here within the city of Lethbridge, and I could see people's like I have a pretty good sense when I walk into a room where other people's charge is. So taking on this new department, I could see this. This department had been without a leader for a little while, and coming in, you could kind of sense that they were. They were a little down, needed some support. So just recognizing that, knowing where my charge is to be able to lift up lift up this group and help support them in the way that they needed is important. If I didn't have that awareness of where my charge was, then that might be a little lacking, and it might not be a good first experience moving into this new group.
How do you see that impact like the team dynamic? Like when, if you're saying like being aware of it can impact it, like what kind of ways can it impact the team dynamic, like as the leader in the room?
Well, I think like Dana mentioned, when your battery is when your charge is low, you don't always make the best decisions. You're more just coping at that point. So you might be doing the bare minimum just to get by that day. So it's important to recognize that, because we all have those days. So when we do have those days, recognize it for what it is, and maybe not make those decisions that day, but be there to support them and be ready to jump in when your charge is restored.
I'm almost hearing like two things there that are like real important. Is like, one, when you're aware of it, perhaps you can mitigate like some of the behaviors you don't want to create. But then the other one I think was almost more important is around that repair piece. Like if it does, because we all have bad days, that you can actually like own up for it or take responsibility for it and say, hey, listen, when I talk to you in that, it wasn't because of you, it was something else going on here. Like I think that's such a critical thing that we can miss sometimes.
It is, or at least recognize too, is sometimes you yourself just need to take a time out. Like I'm not prepared to make this decision right now. Let me come back. I'll come back in a better frame of mind with a more positive charge, and then we'll sit down and talk about it. Sometimes that's the biggest decision you can make that day, and it's the most important.
Yeah, that's great. Dana, just before we transition a bit more into the workplace setting, I'm curious, like, what influences how something could be charging or draining? Because I think, we're talking about this idea of managing it. And I think it might be helpful to get a frame in which people can start to understand, like, well, what in my life is adding that battery capacity, or what might be bringing it down, and how does that work?
Yep. And I'll just follow up on Jason's comment also, which is I will often say, like, I'm sorry, my frontal lobe is done, which like, and I'm like, we can't make this decision, like, unless it's urgent, like we need to push this till tomorrow. Right. And it's helpful for a leader to admit it also, because then that gives permission to employees to acknowledge it as well. Right. Sometimes with clients or patients, I have this expression of like, just lie very still, which means don't make any big decisions. Don't send that email. Don't send that text message you absolutely think needs to be sent. Like wait until wait for night to come, recharge your battery overnight, and then decide tomorrow if it's really the best decision or not. But just like, don't make any big decisions when you're on low battery, because we don't tend to pick up wise decisions. We pick short-term fixes. It's really helpful for people to understand their charges and drains. And there is a ton of individual differences, right? So for an extrovert, being with other people can be recharging. For an introvert, that could be draining. And so understanding your own charges, even just paying attention to it during the day and noticing, like, when were you smiling? When did you feel exhausted, right? To notice what kinds of things, people, activity, we all have people in our lives that are kind of drains, right? And sometimes we have no choice about it, but knowing that, then you can like plan a bit of recharge. If you know you're going to be interacting with them, you can think about how much time, if you can limit how much time you're spending with people. And then there's totally those people that make you smile, right? Totally those people that make you laugh out loud. You just feel good somehow. You just feel lighter, right? So noticing those moments and saying to yourself, like, what was I just doing? And could I do that again on purpose? Is that something that I could, schedule in or do on purpose, and making lists of these things so you can keep it in mind so that you can start to understand your charges and drains.
One thing I think a lot about with that too is like, so for me, like everyone here, I exercise quite a bit. And I do find though, depending on what I'm doing, it's possible that in the exercise, although beneficial health, attention, like all these different, researched elements we know that are positive about exercise, I can also know it can drain me too, because of like the energy deficit that may occur like after doing it. And so something I think about, and I feel like it's been in some, our conversation, I know I've had it with you, Jason, as well, is like, the thing that's healthy for you might not always just be the thing that's charging as well. Like, and balancing that. I'm just curious if you had any thoughts or reflections on that. And maybe we'll start with you, Dana, and then Jason, if you had anything you want to add in.
Yeah, we usually describe a recharging activity as something that makes you feel more energetic at the end than when you started. So people
Mm,
will often like there is a drain, so to speak, when you're working out or exercising. Like otherwise, you're probably not working very hard, right? So there's like an initial drain, but then afterwards, people tend to feel better.
yeah,
Maybe not
yeah.
immediately after, right? But like soon after, people kind of feel that lightness or like you feel a bit better. If you take the example of the ice cream, you probably felt great at the beginning, but not great, an hour later, right? Because it wasn't a recharging activity. So it can help us distinguish these things, but it doesn't mean it feels good the entire time. Often a recharging
Right.
activity requires a bit of battery to get it started, right? You need some battery to get yourself to the gym, for example, but it's a net gain overall, right? So thinking
Right.
about how do I feel kind of after the activity is done, it doesn't mean that it's pleasant or enjoyable or like wonderful the entire time. Sometimes it is, doing important things will drain your battery, right? Doing important
Mm,
things will make you feel uncomfortable. Doing important things requires discomfort. But afterwards, we're really proud of ourselves. Afterwards, we know we've contributed and it's, something important and it makes us proud. And those are the, ways you want to think about it.
yeah, thanks. Jason, for you, I'm curious, when you think about this idea of charge, what do you notice as some of the biggest challenges, like either from like when you think about your like the staff or even yourself or your team, whether it's from like an environmental perspective or organizational one that like really seem to be impacting how people are charged on a typical day?
Uh, these days, just within the city of Lethbridge specifically, I've noticed I've heard a number of comments around the shop and around the city as a whole. Organizational change is difficult.
Mm,
We've been undergoing, well, probably for the last 7 or 8 years, quite a bit of change throughout the organization. I think we've had 6 city managers in that time. So that puts a lot of pressure and angst, I would say, on staff within the city of Lethbridge. We seem to be in a stable spot right now, but you can tell underlying all that, there's the unease of what's happening next, like what's around the corner. So organizational change right now is a big one. Technology is a big one. Social media is it's causes its own issues and really brings people down, and I see that not only at work but I see that at home too. I can see the impact of social media on friends and family and how they view the world. It's difficult right now.
yeah. Yeah, it's funny. We often don't think about that as like a possible energy using activity, like when you're scrolling on social media, even though sometimes it can be unconscious, but like you're creating stimulation that you then have to use brain units to process some way. um, I'm curious for you, Dana, when you think about the idea of a decreased charge, how do you see that showing up inside of the workplace? Like what's the so what behind it, like if it is regularly drained and not at the capacity you'd want to see?
Yeah, we have an expression of like no frontal lobes anywhere, which is just to say that like everyone is like really stressed. There's a lot of stressful things, right? Uncertainty is a big threat for our survival brain. And so it can feel like a lot of people are on low battery.
Mm,
And so when we're on low battery, again, this is when we tend to be like ruder to each other. Like there's these like small things, that we use our battery for that's no longer available for that. And so we know in the long term, it can lead to burnout, right? To me, burnout is when you basically, have an empty battery and cannot recharge it at all. And burnout itself is related to all kinds of problems, including organizational problems like disability leaves, right? Absenteeism, presenteeism, turnover, but then also for the individual themselves as well in terms of depression, anxiety, substance use, right? We can get into some quick fixes like substance use that make you feel better in the short run, but can cause problems in the long run, for example. And so it has a cost, both to the employee and to the organization of people
mm,
being on low battery for a long time.
mm. I mean, Jason, like inside your team or the shop, like how do you see if you've noticed the energy? Like you said, you're really good at sensing it. Like if you notice that it's drained over either short term or long term, how do you see that impact the dynamics or things that are happening inside of the shop?
Well, I noticed an immediate effect back in December when I took on the water utility here. You know, I could see the electric shop, just the general atmosphere tone within the department, the fact that I might be leaving really caused a little bit of upset. Even though I wasn't gone that day, I'm still there and I'll be there for, months to come. It really, it was very noticeable, right away.
Mm.
Like, I had people emailing me within, within minutes of the announcement coming out. So it's pretty apparent. And even like I say, the changes throughout the organization, people are always wondering, we've had some people leave, but there's no real reason given. And so that just adds to it, the unknown of why did this person leave and what happened here. And so there's just a general feeling of uneasiness across the, not just electric, but all departments, I would say.
Mm. It almost feels like unknown and uncertainty keeps coming up, and it almost feels like as a leader, whatever you can do to mitigate as much as possible unknown is of benefit. And I think, I come to the conversations of, the consequence of assuming best intent is maybe you get disappointed, but the consequence of misassuming like the worst intent is, like, as you said, Dana, is like, well, if you don't properly assess that that's a bear, you could get killed by the bear. Versus, so like, we're always going to maybe preference or lean the worst possible scenario.
Oh yeah.
And in my mind, I'm almost thinking, as we're going here, like this, how do we alleviate uncertainty as much as possible? Well, recognizing when you're in senior roles, you may not be able to disseminate all information, but I'm curious if you'd have any thoughts or tips that you've done, Jason, to put you on the spot. And we didn't really have that as a prep question, but around like what you can do to try to minimize uncertainty or, kind of recognize that dynamic that's happening.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the approach is the same for, like, in my case, both the water utility and the electric utility. And it's really, for me, it's actually getting out and talking to people one-on-one and having that FaceTime, that personal connection is just giving the opportunity for people to ask questions. And you're right, sometimes questions can't be answered fully, depending on what the nature of the question is. But at the same time, you give the opportunity to dispel some maybe myths or rumors or thoughts, negative feelings that are out there to help people cope better.
I even find just creating space to listen to people can alleviate so much of the uncertainty, because people, oh, I'm not the only one who's feeling strange and upset and worried. Like, just now knowing others feel that way too can be a real. And I imagine, Dana, you would know the research and literature behind that, or if there's something different you'd want to add into what Jason shared.
Yeah, for sure. So we know that there's a part of our brain, there's that threat system we talked about, but there's also a social engagement system, which is, again, part of your survival brain. So, our survival brain does worst case scenario, as you pointed out, Jesse, right? And that is not the most probable outcome. It's literally the worst case scenario, which might be the least probable outcome, right? But when your survival brain suggests it, it feels more real because it comes along with emotion, and it comes like your survival brain is supposed to convince you right away. That's a bear, run, right? You shouldn't debate the information. And so it feels more real, but it's actually not more probable. It's not more true. It's not more real, right? In fact, it could be even less likely to actually happen because it's worst case scenario. But we have in that survival brain also this social engagement system, which is about humans being able to connect with each other. And it allows us to feel calm and kind of soothed. And when we can activate that, it totally changes our perceptions of the world and makes things feel more manageable and more doable. And so in uncertainty, sometimes our best case scenario is like we're in it together, like we're in the uncertainty together. And feeling like somebody gets you and somebody has your back absolutely changes people's perceptions and allows them to feel like, okay, I can do this because I'm not all by myself. And again, it's part of like how humans are hardwired, part of our survival. We've always needed other humans to survive. And so you can activate that system by doing the things Jason is talking about, which is like somebody's listening to me, somebody gets me. Even if you can't answer all the questions, you've activated the social engagement system, which says, okay, I'm not alone in this, right? Somebody gets that I feel uncertain, and somebody's got my back. So it makes people feel more capable of handling things, even when we can't fix anything.
Yeah, I remember listening to some of Phil Stutz's work, and he was sharing that when we feel those like overwhelming distress, it can be one of the most critical things is, to get movement if you can. And then the second is to find social, like whether it's even just going and sitting in a coffee shop with people around you, it can really, and it must be like what you're speaking to around re-engaging that social engagement system, which makes a lot of sense.
And
Go ahead,
sorry,
Jason.
I was just going to add on one thing that Dana said there too. On the flip side, talking about the water utility, I mentioned, they didn't have a general manager for some time. And even just after reaching out to my management team there, talking to them, sitting down with them, it was incredible, the shift in body language within hours of having those meetings and talking to people and saying, having that support, I've got you back here, was just incredible.
I just, again, another random question. It's something I've wrestled with in my work, and I'd be curious to your thought, Dana, on the social side. So I noticed that when we do some of our culture work, in organizations that don't have solid psychological safety, where people can be vulnerable and share and do what we're talking here on, that's effective social engagement, I notice you get like cliques and this like undertone of gossip that just circles through the whole group. And what I find fascinating is that even in that, though, you would think, well, at least you're gossiping and maybe relating with another person. I often fear in the work we do, and we're creating space to hear, people feel isolated and that their story is the only version, or they're the only ones that feel that way, when even though you talk to 5 different people that still feel the same, but they're talking to each other about the gossip. I'm curious if you've got something in your quiver there, Tickle Trug, as to why that happens, that it's the behaviors going on, but they're not actually anchoring into that sense of connection. They're furthering loneliness. And I'm curious to your thoughts.
Yeah, and it's for the reason you mentioned, which is that they don't have psychological safety. So really connection happens from that vulnerable state, right? Where you're sharing emotions. When you're sharing like things aren't going great, or like I'm stressed, or I feel scared, or I feel uncertain, that's when humans really connect with each other. And so if you don't have psych safety and you're just talking, then you don't have that opportunity to connect at a vulnerable level, and you don't have that ability to engage a social engagement system where you feel connected. And so there are lots of ways of communicating, sharing information, for example, and again, creating psych safety between colleagues. That's really helpful. There's again the version which is gossiping, and again, gossiping, we could take it as one version of it could be just sharing information, right, and creating psych safety. Another version of it is really about like excluding people, trying to control other people's behavior, judging other people, right? None of that's vulnerable. None of that is like how I feel. And so then you end up making people feel more lonely and more excluded.
Yeah. It almost becomes like the primary objective is to have you come on my side, versus like,
you
I
get
want to
in
share
groups
my
and out
experience.
groups.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
I think about, I know I have sometimes some family members where it's like you chat with them and it's like they've just given you the headlines of all the things that are happening and not actually said, well, how do you feel about all the things that are happening? Which is a totally different conversation, right?
Right. The exclusion gossiping version often is about what other people, did you hear so-and-so did that, right? The psych safety version is like, this happened and I felt like this, right? Or I felt really like unnerved when that happened, right? It's sharing your own stuff. It's not sharing what you might lead off with something that is triggering or like, giving you information about how you feel, but it's not about what other people are doing. It's about your own experience.
Yeah, that's a really great delineation. And I imagine that in itself also creates a difference on whether that is actually a draining or even a charging activity for yourself, because you feel heard, seen, validated, all that stuff.
Right. We talk about venting, right? Is venting a good idea? And it really depends on how you do it and who you do it with. If you do it to create psych safety, which is like, this is how I feel, and now somebody understands me about how I feel, then it could be the social engagement. If you're venting to, again, judge other people, criticize other things, not get to a vulnerable state, right? Then, it usually is not going to make you feel better and will often make you feel disconnected.
Great. I'll go to you again, Dana, and then we'll go to you, Jason. The first one I guess I'd have is when you think about sustaining charge, because we're a little bit distanced now, too far away to say Happy New Year, but we're still kind of close to those resolutions happening. So we get the high intense actions, and then it just sort of off. So I'm curious, like the idea of sustaining or maintaining having something that's more likely to occur over time and be consistent versus intense. What tips might you have or suggestions on how someone could lean closer towards sustaining versus hitting that 2 to 3 week window of now we've just reverted back?
Yeah. Again, there's a lot of science of behavior change that we don't apply to change. We don't apply to things like New Year's resolutions, which is why they tend to fail. And overwhelmingly, the majority of people do not keep up their New Year's resolutions, right? A couple of those tips is one, start small and work your way up, right? So I said that I exercise 7 days a week. That's not how I started. I started 1 day a week, right? And I did that for several weeks until that felt manageable. And then twice a week and did that. Like it took me several years before I got to like 7 days a week on consistently, right? So start small and work your way up. How much battery do you really have to dedicate towards this new behavior, right? And pick something that you can like keep up. That's much better than starting big and then doing nothing at all. Right. Another point is to make it attached to something that matters to you. Right. So if I ask myself, do I want to go to the gym? The answer is no. It's really effortful and sweaty and hard work. That's not the right question. The question is, do I want to go to the gym or do I want to yell at my kid at bedtime? Right. It's a recharging activity. And so we often think about recharging as something away from work, away from family, but actually it's in the service of. Right. If I go to the gym, I'm going to show up as a more patient parent. I'm going to be a better colleague. I'm going to be a better leader. It's actually for all the people in my life, right? Ask yourself, who benefits if you have a charged frontal lobe? Yeah, you benefit, but chances are everyone that you care about, all the activities you care about, and potentially anybody you interact with, if you're driving and swearing at people, right? They're all going to benefit from you having a charged frontal lobe. So we need to think about charging your battery not as something that is time away from the things that are important to us, but actually in the service of that. It's necessary if you want to be able to do the things that matter to you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jason, what would you say if you, as a leader, what you could do to encourage your staff to discover their own source of charge, or how to be aware of it or mindful of it? Is there anything you think top of mind that you've noticed within, because in where to bury the lead, like I find your team as well is fairly connected to their what they're doing, so I'm curious, what have you done to make that happen?
Yeah, the most important thing I think is really just talking about it, bringing it up, and recognizing it for what it is. Like I mentioned, I can sense where people are at, within a few seconds of walking into a room. So it's taking the time to approach them, talk about it, and see what's going on, and find out, making it a priority, I guess, is really one thing. Making it a priority amongst the group. We did that a number of years ago here in Electric. We made it a priority to have a safe working relationship where we could talk about pretty much anything that was important to talk about, and not be worried. Have that safe space to have those conversations is really the most important thing. Talk about it and have that space to talk about it.
How did you do that? Because I see sometimes, and I think it's a fall down that can happen when in groups looking for psych safety, where the leader might name it into existence, be like, we have a speak up vulnerable culture, and then it's like, period, the end.
Yeah.
So like, imagine you did more than that, but like, what did you do to curate that, and recognizing, as you said, it's a long process, not just something that happens tomorrow.
It is. Yeah, it's taken probably about 7 or 8 years to get where we are right now. We did get some help. We got some outside help to come in and help, set our priorities, set our goals, what we want it to look like as a department, and then build upon that as a management team. So how are we going to get there? What does that mean? We need to build this safe space. So what do we do to get there? So we did things like we brought in consultants, and we had, we had one-on-one coaching with a number of our staff. We still offer that. We offer opportunities to help better the management team, both individually as well as a group.
What about for you personally? Like, if you had to sit in yourself, like those are things you enabled that weren't what you did, but what did you do to make that happen? Because I think even I've seen groups do that. They bring in all the people, and then it still doesn't work. And to me, I think it comes back to, unfortunately or fortunately, that's the accountability and responsibility of the leader and the most senior person. Like, so what did you do? Do you feel in terms of how you showed up? And I think you spoke to that earlier, some of those things earlier.
What did I do? That's a good question. What did I do? Really, for me, it's about showing up and being vulnerable myself.
Mm,
you know, sharing my experiences, being relatable, I guess, to my staff, so that they know I'm just not this person, you know, sitting in the office and doesn't want to talk about anything other than work and just don't bother me at
mm,
all. No, it's being personable, approachable, and well, for myself, creating that safe space so that when anybody does come and talk to me, they'll know they'll get the real me. Or, you know, if I'm having a
mm,
bad day, I'll say, you know what, let's talk about this tomorrow.
mm, that's really great. Anything you'd add to that, Dana?
Yeah, we talk about being just messy enough to be approachable, right? That being a
Mm,
rock as a leader is actually not very helpful because it doesn't activate that social engagement system. You don't feel comforted by a rock. You might not feel like you're gonna like fall, but you don't feel comforted, right? And so being just messy enough to be approachable, which is about being a real human who sometimes has bad days and sometimes, has low battery, and role modeling that is again the most impactful you can have, right? So normalizing the conversation just means you keep having it, right? Like you talk about it every day. You're always checking in on battery. I think battery is like actually a way of doing like a quick mental health check, right? But it's way less stigmatizing. And so normalizing that conversation, just having it again and again and again. In my calendar, it says like recharge gym, right? So it's
mm,
obvious to everybody that I'm unavailable and I'm doing that because I'm recharging. Those kinds of things give permission to other people to do. We're more likely to follow what a leader is going to do, right? It really can set the tone, and the culture. And so being the thing you want to see again, right? Showing up that way, again and again and again is how you
mm.
change that.
I think what that is, the signaling is almost more important, and then following through, like versus even if you're doing the activity without, like as it relates to impact in the organization, if you're just doing it but not signaling in that manner,
Yeah.
I think it also, oh, do I have to keep this secret?
Right.
Can I do it? Whereas when you have it in your calendar, it's like, oh, I can do that too.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge thing. Liv, maybe we'll open up to see if there's any questions from the audience before we transition to our closing bit. But I feel like we could keep going on these conversations, the two of you, forever. I feel like that's with a few of our, with almost all of our guests. Like, is an hour enough? But I know everyone else has a lot to do. So just curious if anything's coming through from the audience.
Not yet. There was a question at the very beginning just asking, which I think might be a question actually for Stephanie or Alana, but is there a way for us to get a letter of attendance so we can use it towards our CRSP credits? Maybe Stephanie, you can look into that. And then Aaron had just made a comment saying that they love Jason, worked with him years ago at the city. So I guess we'll shut up. So I'll wait for any other questions, but I just had like a comment, I think. I remember, Dana, when you were just mentioning about a little earlier, the habits and developing like sustaining charge and things like that. I remember reading in the literature a little while ago that if you make goals based on then, like if I can't make it to the gym 5 days, or if I can't go on a walk outdoors 5 days a week, then I'll go on the treadmill kind of thing. And do you have any helpful tips for just goal setting, I guess, in when it comes to getting these habits and maintaining charge in general?
Yeah. So one really helpful thing is to make it a behavior, because ironically, we often make it like I want to feel good, or I want to enjoy going to the gym, or I want to feel motivated to do it, right? We think motivation is necessary. It's actually not. Your frontal lobe is what will control your behavior. And so you absolutely can do it without motivation. It's totally easier if you feel motivated, but it's completely possible to control your behavior with no motivation whatsoever, right? And that's why when you get into a routine, it's not that you will always need some intention, right? But it makes it easier because you're not deciding about it. You don't need motivation. You're just following the routine, right? So making it a behavior, something someone else can see you do, recognizing it's okay that it doesn't have to feel good right away, right? And it might feel hard while you're doing it, but afterwards it would be a recharge. Another one is having a do instead goal. So we often set ourselves don't do goals. I'm not going to drink pop. I'm not going to eat sugar, right? I'm going to stop drinking. And actually, those end up creating pink elephants, right? If I told you not to think about pink elephants, you'd suddenly start thinking about pink elephants. And it's the thought suppression effect that the more you try to not think about something, the more you think about it. So what are you going to do instead of drinking pop? What are you going to do instead of drinking? What are you going to do instead of eating sugar, having those concrete things? And then recognizing it's kind of an experiment, right? So at first, when I was trying to find time to go to the gym every day, I would try sometimes, does it work after work? Nope, it doesn't. I'm too tired by that point. I'm not going to go, right? So I end up having to do it in the morning. What time can I do it in the morning, right? So it's just an experiment over time as you try to work these things in. Every time the school, calendar changes, I have to revisit my routine. And does it work with the new schedule? Does it work with the new hockey schedule? All those things, right? So it's an ongoing, effortful thing. And it's a myth that it takes 21 days to build a habit. There's no science behind that, zero whatsoever, right? Sorry to disappoint, but it's still going to be hard on day 22. Like you still need to put effort into it, right? I'm several years into exercising every day and I still have to put effort into it. I still have to be mindful of it and intentional of it. Again, it's helping me do a whole bunch of things that really matter to me. So it's not time away from other stuff. It's helping me do the things that matter to me. And so again, having cues like, reducing how much battery it takes to make that decision, having cues so it's attached to something else you already do on a routine, right? Those are, again, some, scientific principles that help people get into more of a routine and habits.
I think that's so
I
interesting.
also like oh, sorry, go ahead, Liv.
I was going to say, because I'm just looking at a Vanity Fair article, I think, I remember President Obama in 2014 had mentioned that he only wears gray or blue suits and also doesn't decide what he's eating, anything like that, because that's just taking up more brain space.
Yeah.
And so having those habits or having things that are preset can really help maintain.
Absolutely. And again, I think underestimate like choosing your outfit every day takes some battery, right? It's taking some cognitive effort. And so thinking how many things can I just put on a routine so that I don't have to use battery for those things.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The benefit of that is one less decision that you can make somewhere else.
Yep. So
think I saw
before
one
the
go ahead.
pandemic, I used to go to the gym at a different time every day. And then during the pandemic, because it was like so much battery was going to so many other things, right? I had to go at the exact same time every day because I literally couldn't get like my brain to think about what time do I have to leave and to get there on time. And so I'm like, I'm just going to go at the same time every day because then I get up at the same time. I leave the house at the same time, right? It's way less battery to choose. And so that's the routine that I'm in now is it just happens the same time every day.
Funny because I've had those conversations with my partner about that, about like when for me I do it the same time every day. And when if something needs to change, it can be challenging for me. And it's that whole idea that it's no longer a charging activity because now I have to use brain units to decide when can I fit this in and how am I going to manage it, and as well as my emotions about it, versus like when I know it's 9 o'clock or whatever, like it just is happening. And I think it's such a thing that we can overlook sometimes, and we both in relation to yourself, but also how you support others in making it happen for them.
And people think the most important thing is like sticking to your habits. That like sticking to your habits means you never stop doing it. But actually, the more important skill is to start it again because like life gets in the way, right? Stuff's going to happen. And so what the more important skill is like getting back on track as quickly as possible. It's not a question of if you'll fall off the wagon. The better question is how long does it take you to get back on? So the skill is actually restarting it every time you get off track.
That's a good, I was just going to say, that's a good point. I was going to bring that up, at the beginning when you were talking, one of the most important things is, just remember that we're not perfect. So I'm the same way. I go to the gym routine all the time, try to do it the same time every day. And I know when I miss a class, I start to spiral. So I got to recognize that and say, no, you're allowed, things happen. You can take a day off, just get back, back to it. But I'm my own worst enemy when it comes to that. And I recognize that, and it's taken a long time, but I recognize it now. And now I know, stop, just go back tomorrow. Things will be good.
Yeah, it's like the eating that one hamburger is not going to be the issue. It's if you've had like a hamburger every day for 6 months, then maybe there's a different. And I struggle with that too. If I don't get it in today, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? It's going to fall apart. Is there any others that came in? I thought I saw one come in there, Liv. I don't know if there's one that popped up.
Oh yes.
I saw one.
So, are there any tips on how to make decisions when at low charge and the decision cannot be delayed?
Good one.
Yeah, so a couple things like, when a crisis comes usually via email into my inbox, right? The first thing I actually ask myself is like, when did I last eat? Because sometimes the very best thing I can do before trying to tackle the crisis is to have something to eat to make sure my frontal lobe has some like good fuel, right? So again, sleeping is a great recharge, but drinking a glass of water is a great recharge. Taking a deep breath is a recharge, right? So pause, notice, and breathe, right? Take a deep breath, right? Before you launch right into it, think about what matters to you. Think about who you're trying to be, what's important to you, and think about whether you can make a decision that's going to move you closer or further away from your values about how you want to contribute to the world, how you want to care about people, right? But just take a deep breath before launching into something. That alone can help deactivate our threat system.
It's really great.
I think the only thing I would add to that too is just think about it. Is it really that important? There are not many decisions that need to be made right now. I used to be a nuclear operator and I worked in a nuclear plant, and there were some decisions that needed to be made right then and there, but in the big picture, there really aren't. So taking that time to just stop and think and, okay, how important is this really? Does it need an answer like right now? Or can I pause for a few minutes and collect my thoughts and gather some ideas and then move forward?
And also
Yeah.
adding other batteries to the system, right? Can you ask other people's advice, opinions? Does somebody else in your network have more battery than you do in this moment to help you think through the decision, right? Sometimes we're always like, how do I get myself more battery? But sometimes it's also about how do you have a village of batteries? Because different people find different things draining and charging, will be drained and charged at different times for different reasons. And so can I add some batteries to the system to like help make this decision or deal with a low battery situation in general? Right?
I love that. And Jason, you probably correct me on the actual electrical principles behind what I'm about to say, but I almost feel like you're then transitioning to just being a conduit to the charged battery versus like it requiring your battery life to be able to like run the system. I love that idea around a village of batteries. That's a really great one. Yeah, that's a really great one.
And also saving your battery for the most important things, right? Again, there's some stuff that anybody could do, and there's some stuff that only you could do. So it's a total myth that we've kind of created in our culture. Like, if you just try harder, you can do more. It's not, it's a fixed amount. Like, again, you can increase the battery size over time, but like through things like therapy and exercise, like it takes a lot to actually change how much capacity you have. And so it's a better question of like, where do I want to spend my battery? What's most important and what can only I do versus what could anybody do?
That's such a good point. And I think then and looking at that in the relation to the domains of your life as well. Like I think about that in relationship to the relationship I have with my parents, or relationship with my children, or my partner, or clients in my business. Like there's your point that it's not the same answer or the same context for all those different conditions. I love that. Maybe before we wrap up, I'm just curious, and we have a few questions that we also like to ask, and we'll have two for you folks. We'll ask for the answers to be pretty quick. What's the best piece of advice you've received, or something that's so bad that you need to warn us of? And maybe we'll start with you, Jason.
Well, it's actually probably a little personal. Talking about charge, and one of the things I do is I go to counseling once a month, whether I need it or not, whether I feel I need it or not. It's part of my routine as a leader to take that time and get things out there. So when it comes to that, it's finding the right person. It's really important. I've been to a number of psychologist counselors, and luckily I'm with the one that I love right now. We work really well together, but I've been to others that haven't, and recognizing that if you're going to take the time to do that, it's important to make sure you get what you need out of it.
Thanks for sharing that. Dana, how about you?
Okay, I'm going to say a bad piece of advice is, something I'll say that contradicts a piece of advice is happiness is a terrible life goal, because you cannot control your happiness. It is from your survival brain. You have no ability to turn it on, turn it off, or to keep it going. And in fact, sometimes heroin addicts are really happy. right? While they're on heroin, like they feel pretty good. And so it's a lot better to think about purpose and meaning because you absolutely have control over purpose and meaning. And when we say values, like what that means in like our model is about who you want to be, what you want to give to the world, not what you want to get from the world, right? What are you going to contribute? How are you going to care about people? How are you going to connect with people? So being purposeful and meaningful will bring about a whole bunch of pleasant emotions, right? It makes us feel proud. It makes us feel connected. And it's absolutely something you have control over. It's hard, right? Doing value-driven behavior feels uncomfortable at the beginning, but again, helps you feel really good and proud about your life at once you're done or like afterwards. And so chasing happiness is actually a terrible idea. Go for purpose and meaning, and you will actually have a brighter, more vibrant life, not because it's easy, but because you're doing really meaningful things.
Yeah, I deeply agree with that. Deeply.
I feel like that just like opened up my eyes. I feel like seriously, everything.
And also, it doesn't have to mean you're curing cancer, right? Helping someone feel accepted, loved in the world is a deeply meaningful thing to do as well. We really underestimate how important relationships are in our culture and connectivity and community. So making people feel like they belong and that they're wanted and they're loved is like a deeply meaningful thing to do.
That's awesome. Last question, which is as those who followed along, we always ask our previous guests to leave a question for our next ones, and so we'll have you two do the same. But the one we're going to bring forward was from one of our last guests. She had asked, if someone were to Google your legacy in 75 years, what do you hope would come up as the #1 hit on Google? Small question. That
It is. Jesse, we've worked together for the past couple of years, and it took me a while to figure out what my answer to this question would be. But really, the person I am, I don't want to be Google. I don't want anything to be in Google. I don't want to be known for anything. Like I want to fly below the radar. Like I don't really I'm not doing my job for some kind of recognition or, my job when I came to the city, like my goal when I came to the city of Lethbridge was to make the city a better place and to make the electric department better than when I first got there. That's what my hope is. And I don't think you'll ever see anything about that in any Google feed anywhere. And that's perfect. That's what I want.
So the Google is the city of Lethbridge is better, and we're not sure if Jason had a part of it or not.
That's right. Yes.
But we know it got better after he was there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How about you, Dana?
To me, this is a values question again about like, and I think Jason really described it, which is not about accomplishments or like what you got, but like what you gave, right? What you contributed, what you offered to people. And so to me, like, I hope people think, my life's mission is to help reduce human suffering, in particular by increasing access to science-based, psychological tools. But there's a lot of suffering. And when we're suffering, we do mean things to other people also. And so that's my life's mission. And I hope that's what would show up, which again is not about like I had a car and a house and any of those kinds of things. It's about like what I gave to the world.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. What a session. I mean, I feel so much charge after this. As I've said at the beginning, selfishly, my battery was starting to wane as I'm eagerly awaiting my wife's plane to land so that I can take a breath for a second. And I even just have seen a number of comments come in and sharing the same for both of you. And I'll have to say you did not disappoint in the expectations that I had on talking about something from a differing perspective, but finding alignment and some beauty within that. So thank you so much for taking time out of your Tuesday and willing to share with us. And Liv, do you have anything you want to add in before we wrap up?
I just feel like I said, my eyes have just been opened, and I think that this is great. There's so many tips that we took that we got, and thank you for such a fantastic session.
Yeah, thanks so much, folks.
Thank
Have a great day.
You too.